start the webinar so people can attend. Okay, we can start. Hello, everyone. I would like to welcome Julieta Aranda. This is our third talk of our series on intersectionality of climate crisis. This talk, it's called Chemo-sociality, the dark and the light of living with our own toxicity. In Chemo-sociality, Julieta will try to parse our relationship as beings, as humans, as artists, as culture workers to the toxic environments that we have created. How can we negotiate life flourishing in the poisoned landscapes of industrial capitalism? What are the formulations of hope that correspond to the chemically saturated present? In her artistic practice, Julieta composes sensorial encounters with the nature of time and speculative literature. She observes the altering human-earth relationship through the lens of technology, artificial intelligence, space travel, and the scientific hypothesis. Working with installation, sculpture, video, and print media, she is invested in exploring the potential of science fiction, alternative economies, and the poetics of circulation. Her project challenged the boundaries between subject and object while embracing chance encounters, autodestruction, and social processes. And now I would like to give a word to Julieta Aranda.
Thank you, Peter. I think, what I want to focus on the time we'll have together today is a few things, like the idea of toxicity as it relates to the present and to the production of futures, and also the notion of what an epistemic object is. So before addressing this, I want to share one of my works with you. It's a work I made a couple of years ago about the Radium Girls. The Radium Girls were a group of factory workers in the United States that whose work consisted on painting watch faces with phosphorescent paint that was made of radium powder, and they all got poisoned and they were not believed. So it's it's a story about the toxicities that we live with. So maybe I will start with that, and then once we have watched this, I can continue trying to address and put together or separate the topics that I want to talk about. So here we go. The name of this video is Lip Deep Paint Talk. Your mouth is bleeding. So here we go.
We sat at long tables, side by side, in a big, dusty room, where we laughed and carried on until they told us to pipe down and paint.
It's easy. See? You take your little brush here, twirl it between your lips to make a point, then dip it into the powder here.
Why does it shine?
There's a little radium in there.
The running joke was how we glowed. The handkerchiefs we sneezed into, lighting up our purses when we opened them at night. Our lips and nails painted for our boyfriends as a joke, simmering white as ash in a dark room. Would you die for science? The reporter asked us. Science? We mixed up glue, water, and radium powder into a glowing greenish-white paint and painted watch dials with a little brush, one number after another, taking one dial after another, all day long, from the racks sitting next to our chairs. After a few strokes, the brush lost shape, and our bosses told us to point it with our lips. Was that science? I quit the watch factory to work in a bank and thought I'd gotten class, more money, a better life, until I lost a tooth in the back and two in front, and my jaw filled up with sores. We sued, but when we got to court, not one of us could raise our arms to take the oath. My teeth were gone by then. Pretty Grace Friar, they called me in the papers. All of us were dying. We heard the scientist in France, Marie Curie, could not believe the manner in which we worked and how we tasted that pretty paint 100 times a day. Now, even our crumbling bones will glow forever in the black earth.
Okay, I am back now. The what this video brings, so okay, what was the animating reason behind this work, and why I'm showing it now is because I'm thinking about the kind of toxic presence that we create and how they affect any kind of perception of the future that we want to imagine. So in the part, and also like the temporalities that these toxicities entail, as we, like if we think about for example radioactive poisoning, as is the topic of this particular video, we start from like thinking of something that is which was radium in this particular case, that was not understood as a poison then. It was like what we call an epistemic object, something that has properties. It's almost like in the words of like Donald Rumsfeld, who recently passed. It was like a known unknown, something that you know has properties, but you don't know what they are, and you know that it has a use or a menace or a threat, but you do not know what it is. You try to investigate that object. That object, in the particular case of this work, was radium, and it's relevant because it's something that was in the early 20th century was thought that it could have curative properties and some kind of like health benefits or applications and other than phosphorescence and so on. In reality, like at the end, it was like it was beyond pharmacon. It was not just poison that was also a cure. It was pure poison. The one thing that it was useful for, which is interesting for what we're talking about, it was useful to make time visible. So it's something that was used to paint the dials of watches that were used during the First World War, so that we kind of like could, I mean, not we, but yes, we could keep looking at the time of the destruction that we were ourselves inflicting upon humanity. Then, of course, the time after, like some time after, it was shown that the history of radioactivity, and not just, I mean, like that radium is not only useful, I mean, it was used to paint the dials of watches and tell the time in the moment, but it also has a different timeline, a timeline that that exceeds our own timelines. And that's something that can make us think about like temporality, especially when we keep trying to think about the future, right? Like what kind of futures are we building and what is at stake, and what will come after once we get past the moment that we are living. Is this the end of times? Is this the end of history? Is this another end of history? Is this really the end of the world? Like really for real? Are we finally really at the end of history? And it's quite interesting to try to measure things in not just in a human scale, but in the human scale of the last 200 years, like the industrial present, let's say. Because as accelerated as that timeline is, it's also fairly short. So when we try, and because of how short that history, the history of our progress is, I think we have gotten used to seeing results very fast, and we are very impatient about the future. And we keep thinking, okay, let's produce the future. What will the future bring? And everything is fine as long as the future is starts tomorrow. And the thing is that we can't, I mean, at the same time that we keep trying to impatiently expect that the future will produce itself and will deliver itself now, we also word it improperly, in the sense that it's a bet and it's a deferment. So the possibility of like this constant thinking about this immediate returns on our investment, let's say, that becomes the future, makes us not able to actually focus on producing the present and on thinking, and not even producing the present, but looking at what the grounds are that they're trying to build the future upon. And that brings me back to the idea of like chemo-sociality and like trying to look at the present as this like incredibly toxic poison ground, and trying to figure out what it is that we actually can do with it, and what can we build out of it, and how can we take responsibility for all these for our toxic commons, let's say. Because the commons are, of course, a very beautiful image if we think of them as unpolluted landscape where we go and grow tomatoes. The reality is that the commons are fairly barren ground, that we need to, first of all, maybe heal is not even the word, but we need to understand, first of all. I mean, I think before we heal anything and before we move into the future, we need to understand what it is that we're dealing with and to see if it is something that in fact needs healing or that it just needs to be accepted as the new version of what our own existence is. And the moving into futures untold, or like trying to capitalize on it and make it mean something, does not let us look at what the entire scope of this state is. So I mean, like it's interesting to think about that also in terms of like radiation, for example, and like thinking about like the what's called the half-life of chemical compounds and radioactive materials that like poison land and poison landscapes and poison universes of being, well beyond our understanding of what a human life is. We tend to be pretty bad at imagining life beyond our own, beyond 100 years. And we plan for futures untold. The reality is that like just about anything we build becomes anachronic within 50 years. So our projections of futurity are fairly mediocre, and our capacities for futurity are really mediocre. If you think about it, you would not be able to use a computer from the 1970s. You could not even read a file from the 1970s. You couldn't even read a file from 2001, I imagine. So we are actually only capable of speaking to ourselves more or less 20 years in the past and 20 years in the future. Everything else is fairly unavailable. So when we think about that kind of like scope of real communication and the kind of like the quiet half-life of toxic compounds that are like poisoning our water and poisoning our land and that are creating by us as we keep trying to save the earth or claim to save the earth, we are also using technologies and chips and heavy metals and compounds that poison the land well beyond our understanding of duration. And this idea of duration actually becomes important now if we think about what happened in the last like 18 months and how our temporality of poisoning changed. Yeah, like we kind of like got used to a sense of dystopia and to a sense of impending doom that was tied to the melting of the polar ice caps. So we had this kind of like a slow-mo, kind of like a time lapse, where you can like where if you leave an ice cube, you can kind of and a camera in front of it, you can watch it melt over time if you speed up the frame, but you don't see it with your naked eye. You only see it if you speed up the video later on. So we kind of like were resigned to a 60-year slowly increasing disaster. And what happened in 2020 is that like the whole sense of what disaster could be or what extinction could be changed, and our timeframes change, and also our relationship to climate change. And what was supposed to be a year where we were concerned and loving about the world, it became a year of fear. And at the same time that we became really conscious of our own fragility, we probably produce more plastic trash and single-use plastic trash than ever. We did not fly so much, but we produce so much trash in the form of like, I guess, plastic masks and latex gloves and so on. So now that we try to move into a sense of like a new normal or a post that, and is it possible to retake that kind of like the kind of pandemic. Like, is it possible to go back into the Fridays for Future and Greta Thunberg concern, or do we actually have to also deal with ideas about our temporality and our dealing with our own toxicity, like not just saving the world for our children, but understanding like the kind of inherent toxicity that we produce, and that perhaps making worlds where it's possible to grow tomatoes in parts of the world at the expense of entire nation states that are forgotten, or that are like unevenly rescued, it's not a viable proposition. So yeah, I mean, like, I don't know, maybe I would like to see if there are some questions or responses to this kind of provocation.
If you have any question, you can ask us on Facebook or here in the Q&A column. So please, if you have any, just put a comment and I will read it. And I'm thinking that about the toxicity, what you mentioned, that there are like different people have different approaches to this toxicity, and what is in the power of the people, you know, that some of us has like more impact to the toxicity of the planet, and some of us are like without the power to do something.
You know, when I'm talking about toxicity, it's not because I am advocating for purity, because I think that at this point, a purity is impossible. So these images of nature, you know, like this unpolluted nature where we are, you know, like back to the primal origins, growing tomatoes, naked like Neanderthals or whatever, it's impossible.
Yeah.
We poison the place. So what, and we share the poison. It's not just the poison for Bangladeshis and you know, Syrians and Mexicans, while there are like people living this kind of like, well, there are like Germans making sourdough, yeah, and like enjoying nature in this kind of like fry corporate culture way. I mean, like the poison is everybody's poison, and it's not, and maybe that's what I'm trying to think about. Yeah, like that. It's, I mean, like I see these like two different contradicting things where there are, you know, like there are people that are being really slowly poisoned, or not even so slowly poisoned, and at the same time there is a whole narrative about like clean living and back to nature, and I'm like, but what nature? Like nature is like, it's just scratch the surface under this poison, so own the poison. Yeah, like share the poison. It's everybody's. It's on your cell phone. You cannot Instagram your sourdough bread and think that you're having this thing because you eat all this organic food that is been grown on the backs of people that have to eat poison because all these like beautiful tomatoes are only for you. So it becomes this where, you know, this kind of like where nature becomes the biggest commodity, and this kind of like righteous way of living, and like it's back to almost a feudal system where the only people that could appreciate nature were the leisure class, because everybody else was really toiling the fields and breaking their backs, trying to grow wheat and destroying their hands toiling the soil, so they could not appreciate the beauty of it. And that kind of like uneven distribution of subjectivity. This is not even about resources, it's about subjectivity. Who can actually see the nature? Yeah. So, or who can see these halcyon days? I mean, like for whom is that kind of like natural living is available for whom? And at the expense of what? So that's I'm a little bit skeptical about these images of demanding that we are all growing tomatoes in our balconies and baking our own bread, because then I think, you know what, like I am a single mom and I am fine, but there are people that are like the single mom of 3 kids with 2 jobs. What tomatoes? Yeah, they can't even wash their own clothes. That those demands, this kind of like demands that you have to give your kids the best life that you can and do this whole thing and enjoy the life and engage with the present in this clean and pure way, when you actually can only afford a can of tomatoes today and maybe some bread. And you have to also feel guilty because you are not dealing with so it's really perverse.
Yeah. And it's become a very expensive way of life.
It's a kind of like it's very it's perverse because it's moralistic. Yeah. It's, I mean, like, so if you have been removed, I mean, like, if you're part of these people that have been completely removed from any kind of possible engagement with nature, you are not only poor, you're also bad. You're also evil.
Yeah.
And there is a kind of frightening sense of moral purity that comes with this. It's no accident that in Germany during COVID, there were these like manifestations that were basically Nazis and hippies together. Yeah. Like all these people that were obsessed with purity, protesting vaccines and protesting immigration, and protesting all this hodgepodge of subject matter that was all about, like, we want this pure thing. And what I want to object is that there is no pure thing. We poison the entire ground, and we share the poison.
And there is no way back. There is no way back.
I mean, all that kind of nostalgic thought to me is frightening because it's conservative. It's like it makes me think of Trump. Make America great again. Makes me think of Joe Biden. Build back better. And makes me think about people not wanting to engage with the present. What is the post-pandemic? Post-pandemic. It's like, well, no, we are in the middle of it. Like, stay put. Look at it in the face. Be shit scared, but be here.
And this image doesn't exist anymore of the purity. And I think for many people it's acceptable because it's they're giving them some false hope, or you know what I mean? That's
I mean, it's exclusionary, like the point is that it's false. It's I mean, like, while we think that we are protecting something, but it actually does, it's a mechanism for exclusion because it excludes anyone that can't afford that purity. And I as I was saying, I find it really perverse. I want to imagine it because it's calling for a kind of like a homogenization, a kind of like pure lineage, pure things, pure nature. It's like, well, we came around a few thousand years ago and we fucked the entire thing up. And we can also make, like, whatever happens with it now, it comes with the toxins and the poison and the things that we grew in ourselves, and we cannot just escape and go into a bunker and be like, oh, okay, now I'm just going to turn the clock back and like weave my own. I have enough time to make my own clothes and make my own children's clothes. Never mind that people have to work 50 hours a week and get paid like nothing. This is different, like there are people making clothes for 8 cents an hour because they're working for H&M factories in Bangladesh. But here I am making by hand my children's clothes with this precious cotton that I grew in my farm. And just like these two universes together makes my head hurt. And it's like, you cannot advocate for this world unless you banish that one. The two of them cannot coexist. It's like feudalism. It's not possible.
And it's
so
not,
this
and it's not separated. We are living in one world.
No. And it's one world. If like if you're going to grow tomatoes in your balcony because you have, I don't have that half an hour to water my plants. I can't imagine how it is for people that have it worse than me. With 3 kids, with 2 jobs, with less money, like sourdough bread. Like anyone that talks to me about sourdough bread and fermentation and like this kind of like beautiful modes of life, I'm like, you don't have kids and you're not part of a remittance economy and you don't have ailing parents that you have to support and you do not know those realities. So that world that you're advocating for is not possible. And if it is only possible for you, at the expense of a million other people, then it's not possible at all. So I'm just like talking about all this, trying to imagine avenues of possibility for a common world that is not so pure. Maybe purity for me is not interesting because it's not possible. And I'm trying to think of what is a possibility that takes the ugly into account.
When I'm thinking about this, I'm actually very, very skeptical about the world we are living in.
I just don't care for purity, like I really don't. Purity purity is something I would like to put a moratorium on. So how can we thrive in an impure world? And perhaps that's like the whole point of what I wanted to talk about today, like this kind of like that's what really at this point what seems to be crucial to me, rather than thinking back about like going back to nature. We don't go back anywhere. We cannot go back. That's just not in the nature of how we move through time.
We
can learn from the past, but we don't go back.
Sorry, we have one question from Rado. I wonder how you reflect on ecofascism in the one hand, and the fact that the quality of groceries differs even within Europe, like between Germany and Slovakia, and most people are oblivious to what they eat compared to the righteous elites.
That's exactly what I'm, ecofascism, that's exactly what I was talking about. This kind of, it became very patent in this, I used to refer to it as the worst, that's like negative solidarity, the worst form of intersectionality. Hippies and Nazis together advocating for some kind of like Steiner purity. When we are all facing the land, and of course we are all blonde, and of course we are all beautiful, and I mean, like in this sense of what's possible, if as I was saying, I mean, like the way I reflect to it is, if it is not possible across the board, it's not possible at all. It's feudalism. And of course the quality of groceries even in Berlin, it's very different if you go to Aldi or Netto than if you go to Edeka. It's very different what you can afford. In New York, like if you're living in a predominantly Latin neighborhood, you don't get any fresh produce, and a lettuce is twice as expensive. So it's really and I mean, like, I love community gardens, but I also understand, I mean, like, I had time to go to a community garden before I had a child. Now I am exhausted and I put frozen pizza in the oven because I'm not going to make pizza from scratch. I know how to, but like, I can do that once a week. not a chance that I'm going to do that every day. I mean, like, not a chance. So, and again, you know, I mean, I'm someone in a position of privilege. So how that is for people that are not in my position, it's, I mean, like, I'm just like staring at a hole of darkness while getting all these uplifting ideas of self-empowerment and well-being and clean living. And if you would only buy organic groceries, you would feel so much better. Well, who can afford that? Yeah, like, and that is a way. It's very insidious because it's conflating a mode of health that was imposed upon people with moralism. I mean, I think about this. I'm going to tell a personal anecdote. Yeah. When I was a child in Mexico, I come from a very poor family, so we only ever shopped in the market. And my grandmother had this bag that she made herself that she would take to the market. She used to sell fish in the market, so it was like the bag that she brought her fish in that she would shop with, and there was no plastic actually coming to and from the market. If anything, there was some newspaper. And then as I grew up, that bag was ridiculed. Like, I remember very well people that I went to elementary school with laughing at the bag because they had these plastic disposable bags that they could buy their things with. And like the bag of my grandmother was anti-hygienic and was like miserable and a sign of poverty. So eventually my grandmother and my entire family moved into disposable plastic bags. And now, 30 years later, these kind of homemade shopping bags are actually really expensive. You can get them, but they are really expensive. And that's what like all the eco-organic grocery people shop with. And the people that have the the same kind of like financial possibilities that my family had when I was growing up, they are resigned to disposable plastic bags because even all the meaning and like the possibilities of those homemade modes of moving groceries from one place to the other has been taken away from them. And if they want to buy one of those, they have a brand attached to them and they are really expensive. So it's insidious and it's co-opting and it's dark, I find. I mean, there are, like there are ways out of it, but and of course I want to imagine ways out of it, and I want to imagine ways out of it that involve better ways of living, but I can't imagine that we'll be able to find those ways out unless we stare at this darkness in the face. Mm. And unless we take ownership of our shared toxicity.
When I'm thinking about ways of out, when this is something which is really huge problem and it's global problem, and I think it's also problem to think about at global scale, and I think we need to find like really smaller ways out, like think
absolutely
think about it on a really small scale. Like we can start with our neighbors, let's say, then we can think about the villages, cities, and what I think would make us like what paralyze me always, it's to think about it on the really huge scale, and then you can see the way out because of the scale and
But I think that thinking at scale, I mean, it does, this is like a Silicon Valley question, yeah, like you talk about the way of living and then there comes Elon Musk and says, can this be scaled? And then instead of, the answer is not yes or no. The answer is, why does it have to be scaled? Why does it have to be, nothing can be produced at that, or should be produced at that scale, because it's, that's when you start like doing real damage. One of the things, and I'm going to go back for a second with an anecdote to something that has to do with being an artist. 2 years ago, I made a work about invisibility, and I've been quite conscious about my materials and the things, how I produce and what I ship around when I make work. So I try to ship very little. If I have to choose between shipping a large object and shipping myself and making the work on site, and I tend to ship myself because I think that's more productive than shipping cement. So anyway, I had a show and I thought a lot about it. I made a lot of instructions. I told people, okay, I'll come to install when I can. When I can't, this is how you install. And here is all that you will need. And I shipped a roll of paper and 2 cardboard boxes. And this was in 2019. I shipped out of my studio. It was like a very modest shipping for a large exhibition that was going to travel for 2 years. And then a few months ago, in April, I think, yes, in May, I finally, the show was traveling around for 2 years, and then I got my work back. And so, I got like a call from a transport company, and they're like, okay, can we deliver the work? And I was like, sure, just bring it to my house. I'm thinking I'm going to get a roll of cardboard, and a roll of paper and 2 cardboard boxes. No, I got 3 gigantic crates back. And actually there was a transport person, and of course, that's what I was expecting. So I live in an apartment that has kind of like an elevator, but you still have to go upstairs, and it's not prepared to transport big crates. It's not a studio. So of course there were these 2 people, and they were like trying to bring this gigantic crate up the stairs, and then they couldn't, because one of the men that was like bringing this thing, and of course I couldn't speak with him because he was Polish, because it's underpaid kind of like black labor. And anyway, he ended up like really damaging his hand and had to go to the hospital in the middle of the transport. And so this big crate was stuck on the stairs of my building, blocking the door of my neighbors. And it was a big drama, like a gigantic drama, because my neighbors could not leave their apartment and I could not move it. And I had to dismantle the crate myself, but it was super heavy. It was like a horrible ordeal. It took 3 days. And when I finally opened the crates, which were heavy and bulky and were like shipped around the world and costed so much money, I was being given back all the wood of the crates, the broken hand of this Polish transport person, 3 gigantic pieces of plastic that were covering the prints that I sent originally rolled in a cardboard tube, and a gigantic, super heavy crate that contained the 2 cardboard boxes that I sent originally. And I had to pay 200 euros to get a removal company come take that crap from my courtyard, because the garbage service were like, we don't take that stuff. So I was just thinking, why didn't you just send me the money to reprint the images that I sent you originally? Because they got damaged. You're like sending me 3 damaged prints, 3 gigantic pieces of plastic, the broken hand of a Polish transporter. So that entire process was so perverse. And that's something, and I'm thinking, that's what I was against. That's why I sent without crates. That's why I sent cardboard. and I sent everything small. And I could have sent files. I'm precious about how I print, so I sent the things that I printed. But you could have just wired me 300 euros. You did not need to break this Polish guy's hand. And and you're not thinking about it. You just like think that you contacted the transport company, that you did everything right because you sent me the plexiglass. Why do I need 3 giant sheets of plexiglass? So this is, to me, this is part of the problem. Yeah, like I'm going a very long way about it. Yeah, but if we take these concerns as only a subject matter, but we are unable to really engage with them properly, like why are we going to make? There is an artist's name I will not name that makes this ecological concerned work, and part of it involves shipping gigantic rocks around the world. I'm like, for real? Like, really? And it's not all about Elias, yeah? But it's like, are you really shipping? I mean, like, really? I mean, like, I'm fine. If you want to make work that is about these like giant rocks in the ocean, fine. But don't tell me that there is anything ecological about it, yeah? That's pure buzzword. Like, own your toxicity. Don't dress it as something else.
I was thinking actually during the first lockdown about the ways of spending money in art world or art institution, that everyone was trying to produce something, even world falling apart, and I was like, why everyone doing something online?
Own the moment, own the moment, own the moment. Spiritus is that's part
and
of the problem.
Like, this is doom happening on our planet. Please just stop. And why art institution can start thinking about how to, like, they have these resources and put it somewhere else, maybe, instead of producing constantly producing something.
But there was like something that needed to be produced, but it was community, and it was not this demand for screen time. I mean, I don't do a lot of Zoom things. I don't like them. I do it for you because we have like a long-standing relationship, and I do it for a couple of other people, but this is not where I am best. As I was saying, I would never, I don't want to ship big chunks of wood around. I'd rather ship myself and make the work on site with the people I'm working with, because that feels a lot more real. And then I'm working with the materials at hand, and my work is really intensely site specific. And I like to respond to the people on the site, to the materials on the site, to the conditions of the site. But like in terms of like what needed to be produced in the past year and a half, I don't think it was like a lot of like meaningless like Zoom demands by across time scales by people that were like going like crazy in their pajamas at home, being forced to work. What needed to be produced is like a sense of community or a sense of like it's belonging, and it's here, we are here for you, and what do you need? Not what can you give us, but what do you need?
Yeah.
So the demand was upside down. I mean, like, people would ask me, what can you give us? And I mean, like for the past year and a half, I said, I can't give you nothing. I have nothing. And I mean, like only now, as I was telling you this before, only now I have processed the last year and a half, and I have come to a couple of conclusions, and there is something that I can say. But the past year and a half, any kind of demand that I received felt really abusive. Or any kind of request. It was not demands, they were requests, but like all the requests felt extractive and abusive, and I refused them all.
I totally understand. It's and we hate Zoom things too, and we try to avoid them as much we could. But yeah, and I'm looking forward to do something in person. I hope very soon. And yeah, maybe we can wrap it up here. And thank you everyone for watching us, Rado for the question, and thank you for Aranda for your beautiful talk and your time.
Thank you, Peter. More soon. I look forward to seeing you in person sometime.
Soon.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you
Okay.
very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.